Hey, welcome to our second iteration of Finding Jesus. We're looking to find Jesus in the world, the culture around us. All truth is God's truth. So where do we see Jesus and the gospel story popping up in works of art, literature, movies, film, television? And for our church right now, we're going through a series called Knowing Jesus, where we're seeking to know him more, know him better. So we're doing this project, this special project, Finding Jesus, in concert with that, just looking at different theological themes and where we can kind of see those themes play out in different art mediums as well. So we got Mike and Kyle here with us again. If you didn't catch last month's conversation, love for you to do so. You can go to our website, calvary.church/knowingjesus, or on our YouTube channel. I don't know. We can probably put some links somewhere, either in the description or on the screen. But before we jump into kind of today's theme, we're going to be looking at the image of God. Just want to kind of start conversation. I didn't even tell you guys I was going to ask you this, but is there anything you guys have been watching or reading recently that's just, I don't know, been interesting?
Go ahead, Mike.
There's, I'm reading a book called Station 11, which I'm enjoying. It's a very good book. Interesting in a couple of different ways. It's sort of an end of the world book. I think Kyle's reading it too. So I just finished a book that's an old book called People of the Lie, which is it's written by a psychologist who becomes, I think, a Christian in the writing of the book, is because it's about interacting with people, encountering people who are or have evil, and how to understand that, and so on. And he characterizes them as being people of the lie. So that's been a couple of books I'm in the process of or just finished reading.
Yeah, I'm reading Station 11. I just finished E. Cummings' complete works, so over 1,000 poems. I just finished. My favorite author of fiction is Joe Abercrombie, good fantasy author. I just finished his eighth book of 9 that he's written in a series. So I'm always reading something.
What was you, Brad?
I'll say I feel like really shallow. I've just been reading Jack Reacher novels, which, I mean, they're good. They're fun. Yeah. It's especially I think in 2020, right? Reading a book that I know it's always going to end, that good is going to triumph over evil. So that's been good. Then Mal and I, we've been watching Worst Cooks in America, which I never would have thought that I would have enjoyed it, but it's quite entertaining. There's a lady in one episode, she was trying to make chocolate with vanilla and brown sugar. It didn't go well for her.
Sounds like there's nothing chocolate in there. Yeah.
Right.
It seems like you'd have to have some chocolate at some point, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Cocoa powder or something.
Yeah, something that makes chocolate.
Right.
Anyway, for our discussion today, looking at the image of God and where we're at in our Knowing Jesus series, we see that we kind of moved past like the preparation stage. We talked last time about Jesus and the incarnation. And this kind of sub-series that we're in is we see Jesus having all of these different encounters with people. And each person that he encounters, he kind of shows or embodies maybe a little bit, something a little different, something that person needs. And so he meets Nicodemus, and he has kind of this real thoughtful interchange. It's an intellectual conversation. He meets the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, and he treats her with grace just by even having a conversation with her. And so we're going to continue to see that played out through the next month, just different ways that Jesus has these just very human encounters with people. And so we're looking at the idea of what is the image of God. Genesis chapter 1 says that, humans, mankind, man and women were made in the likeness of God, right? They're made in his image. And so that's a value statement. That's a statement about humans. We see Jesus, he recognizes the image of God in each person. And then Colossians, Paul, he writes in Colossians chapter 1 that Jesus himself is the image of the invisible God. And so there's a lot around just kind of that idea. I think in church world, we throw out that phrase a lot, right? The image of God. I've already said it probably 10 times just in this introduction. So yeah, I just want to kind of spend some time like talking through that. What is it? What is the image of God? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? What does that mean for us as we try to, I don't know, image God well in our lives in a world that's broken and in a world that threatens our ability to image God well? And then ultimately, as we look at the end of the story, right, that our image of Godness isn't going to go away, right, in a redeemed and a restored creation. And so that plays there too. So I just want to start out throwing to you, Mike, image of God as a definition. Like, how do you think about it? How would you define it? Where do you see it?
Well, it's not like dictionary defined for us in the scripture. So that's what makes it a little more. You got to use a few more words and put a few more pieces together scripturally to answer the question. But you know, one way to think of it is, or perhaps the first way I think of it is, everything else was made and the animals was made and nothing else was singled out as being made in God's image. So it's a unique correspondence to some qualities that God has, that we are made with some characteristics, abilities, um, something that's intrinsic to who we are as humans, that's different from any other part of creation, that corresponds with God's qualities in some ways. And probably, you can think of, you can say your dog loves you, but it's not the same thing as a person loving you. There's a different sort of quality to it. The word actually means almost something different. So, we display the image of God when we're in relationship to God and to men and women in creation, and it's love and truth and justice, and when we lead and caretake well, when we create beauty and have a higher level of understanding of the world that we're in. All of that corresponds in some way to God. In other words, that they're sort of mirror images, dim mirror images of stuff God has and that we have from Him. And that's and that's probably alongside of the kind of the good character quality stuff that you'd think of. Yeah, because I think both of those things are important. Because you can be a horrible person in some sense, and you still can bear God's image imperfectly. You're still an image bearer, and you still might. Some artists that we really like, that we look at the beauty of their work and say, "Boy, that's really God's image coming out in them." Might be a really troubled, individual, to put it kindly. And so I think it's something more than just being good. Um, and in fact, it's something different than being good. Being good's involved in it. Maybe the ability to be good in a way is partly being in the image of God, but it's a bunch of stuff that sets us apart from all other creation and sort of sets us maybe next to God, and allows us to be image bearers as we work and as we repair things and as we build friendships and so on and so on and so on. So it's hard, to be human is to be an image bearer, uh, whatever kind of human it is, and every kind of human we see. So I don't know if that's a.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, so do you think like inevitably we're going to bear the image? I mean, we are that. So in some way, shape,
Yeah.
or form, that's going to come out somewhere.
Yeah, and I think you take an extreme example, did Hitler bear the image of God? Well, he was able to rule, he was able to rule and draw together a people. He sort of, in other words, he used qualities that are human, but they were bent by sin, and they were powerful because they come from being an image bearer. They're just powerful in the wrong direction because he was, he had evil. And so it's like if he wasn't an image bearer, he couldn't have been as bad, right? So even really bad people are image bearers, and part of their badness involves being they're bad in a way only an image bearer can be.
Mm.
It's not like a rabid dog. It's a different thing. A rabid dog might bite and kill somebody, but it's not the same thing as an image bearer doing that. There's like a weight to it. In Genesis 9, I think it is where it's, if someone kills a person, they should be put to death because they've killed an image bearer, right? That's the sort of the basis for that human beings are weighty people, weighty, significant, because they're image bearers.
Yeah, so. I wasn't expecting to go there, but anytime we can bring up Harry Potter, I will. I think of when Harry is in Ollivander's wand shop, right? And he's trying to get his wand, and like the wand that, picks him or chooses him, has this like shared characteristic with the wand that, Voldemort, who's, if you haven't watched Harry Potter, Voldemort's the bad guy. There's
Brad explains it as if everyone obviously has heard,
right,
knows
obviously.
Everything about, right. Yeah.
But anyway, there's this connection there, and Ollivander's like, oh, that's curious. And he says, the other wand, like it did really bad things, terrible things, but great things. So I think that's similar, interesting.
Has the capability for great in one direction or great in the other direction. I think that humans are like that, and that you can be, like I said, a very, very flawed person and bear the image in some sense quite well. I was thinking in terms of movies, I was thinking of, it's an old movie, but Amadeus, which is a movie about Mozart's life. And it's sort of the theme of the whole movie, that Mozart is, brilliant, and his music is beautiful, and he's also sort of a very flawed person, very profane, flawed person. And his rival, who's the sort of approved, the state approved composer, that really, it really almost destroys him, because here's this awful person who, he listens to his music and he hears the voice of God. And I think that's, he couldn't wrap his mind around that. But I think it's for us, we can experience and participate in the beauty of another image bearer, even if the image bearer is not good.
Right? Yeah, that's a pretty incredible thing he could do. Like, somehow separate the two, like not dislike the guy so much or have so much ego invested in it that he's like, I'm just going to dismiss his music. Like, he's still open to receiving it and acknowledging it's the best. Like, not only is it the best, it's the voice of God.
Yeah. 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 And I think so. I think it's hard for us to remember that sometimes. I think we think of ourselves being good and developing good qualities. And the more we develop good qualities, the more godlike we are, which there's one sense, and that's true. But there's another sense in which we can't stop being image bearers, no matter what we do. We just are sort of bad image bearers, or image bearers in the wrong direction. So I think that's, you can't watch a movie or read a book without experiencing people who are bearing the image in some way, even if the author never had that intent, just because this is who we are.
Yeah, that's really good. I've seen different illustrations. I love that description of bearing the image in the wrong direction. We've used an illustration before where you take like a mirror, right? Because an image, right, is a reflection in some sort, and shattering the mirror, it still bears the image. You can still see some sort of reflection, but it's really not accomplishing its purpose. It's not giving a very clear image, if you will, of the one of whom we're supposed to be imaging. When I think of the this phrase is image of God, right? Like we could make it into a scientific bullet point list of all of the different ways that we do bear God's image, right? You could look at communicable and incommunicable attributes, right? The ones that we share with God, the ones that we don't, right? We're none of the omnis, right? We're not omnipotent. We're not omnipresent. We're not, um, all powerful. Like we're not all of those things, but we are to a degree. Like I can know something. I do have some power. I am present, at least in a singular location. We could look at different characteristics. A lot of times, I think historically, humans are relational, right? We have relationship with other people in ways that you don't see in anywhere else in creation. Um, I think we've already hit on this idea that we image God in the way that we subdue and rule the earth, right? That's in that creational, mandate that God gives humankind. David in Psalm 8, right, describes that a little bit as well. And I think that's kind of to your point, Mike, what you were saying is that's one of the main ways that we do image God is that we have an ability to rule the earth, right? We hear this phrase, as goes Adam, so goes the world, right? As goes man, so goes the world. That is a unique calling to the person. But then we also see this idea of like, I think creation, right? Like we as humans we get to share in God's creativity. We can't create out of nothing like God can, but he does give us the power to shape and to make things. So I'd love to just chat a little bit about that because that is something that I think is unique to humankind. We are invited to share in God's creativity, and when we create things, we are modeling, we are imaging God in that process, which I think is one of the reasons that makes this conversation so powerful in using film and books and literature, because I think you see that, especially when it's discussed in community, right? There's something there that's unique to that process. So, yeah, I don't know if you guys wanted to add or say anything kind of, off that.
Yeah, I think just as I mentioned, reading E. Cummings, I try to read a decent amount of poetry, and I hadn't read much of his stuff. And poetry's so like, I don't know, most poetry I read, I connect with like a small percentage of it, maybe. Like David White's one of my favorite poets, and almost all his stuff I connect with and love. But E. Cummings, it's like 1,000 poems, and I connected with, maybe 100 out of 1,000. Doesn't mean the other ones weren't brilliant. Like he's a brilliant poet. He kind of seems like he shattered the normal structures of poetry to just do something way out of the box. But of those 100, I can read some, and I'm just blown away. I'm blown away at this guy's skill set, like that nobody else that I've read really has. What he does creatively with poetry is beautiful, and I don't know. There's just something wonderful about that.
I love that word you used, Kyle, when you said beautiful, because I do think that there's something like, I know we've been talking when we say image of God, right? How well are we imaging God, or how well do we bear that likeness? And that's maybe not a helpful word, right? Because that's like a quantity, right? Oh, I'm bearing God's image to the, this percentage. But beauty, I think, is something that is observed, it's felt, it maybe takes. It's not as possible maybe to define or to quantify. But I do think there is something about humans, right? And what we do, what we make. I don't know. There's like beauty and goodness I don't know. I think they're good. I think they're helpful words for our discussion.
Yeah, there's something that makes me a little sad about. I think there's a lack of creativity in. I don't know if I can say around the world, maybe in our culture. I heard somebody. This is probably in the last couple of years, say they did like an interview of kindergartners, I think it was. And it was like, I'm going to mess it up, but I'll get it close. It's like 80 to 90% of kindergartners thought that they were creative or that they had a good imagination. And they went back a few years later, third or fourth graders asked them again, and it was like less than half. And it may have been worse than that, but I just think what a sad thing. Like that there's these kids that at a pretty young age think that they can't create beautiful things. And I probably would have put myself in that category. And we talked about Harry Potter earlier. I didn't read until I read Harry Potter, really, and then I fell in love with literature because of J.K. Rowling, because I connected so much with that book that since then I've read a crazy amount of stuff because I've just fallen in love with reading and finding beauty in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the very act of creating anything is bearing the image, and certainly creating anything artistic. One of the themes of this book I'm reading, Station 11, is art for art's sake. There's a number of different art produced not for fame or money or glory, or maybe for no one else even to see. Uh, uh, and that is that the creation of a story uh, or something, anything like that, is something that is uniquely human and bears God's image. He is the first creator, and a lot of creators obviously don't see it that way or don't acknowledge that. Perhaps, I think we talked about Tolkien last time, and that's one of he's got this poem called the Mythopoeia, which he basically reflects on this very, he creates so that people can see. He creates some image that will, people will then see perhaps the true creator. That's part of his creed, um, his philosophy, part of his goals of being a creator is to bring glory to God, even in writing stories in which God is not. There is no God in the story, but it's still the same sort of that idea. And it made me think of, another example. I don't know if you've seen it's a documentary, I think, called The Biggest Little Farm, a couple of years ago. And it's basically the story of this couple who leaves life in LA and gets this piece of land and tries to turn it into a farm. And basically, it's a lot of ups and downs. And but at the, they end up creating this beautiful farm out of this piece of ground, and it takes a lot of time, effort, and energy. But that there is, in a sense, a stand in for everything. Every farm that's ever been created didn't used to. At some point, it wasn't a farm, and somebody had to cultivate it. And so I think even when we say creative, it doesn't even have to be artistic creative necessarily.
Yeah, we have a very
be.
limited, I feel like we have a very limited view of what it means to be creative.
Yeah. We tend to think of some piece of art that you can look at or experience afterwards. That's creative. Or, maybe a song that you can sing. But there's all sorts of things in which you take something that wasn't and you bring it into being, or you radically change the form of it. And so I think we create, somebody creating a business, or remaking a business, or even leading a business well, all involves bearing the image, or well or poorly, Uh, and I think that's there. Yeah, there's no second class image bearers, in a sense, that we're all called to. We all have the opportunity to bear the image well, and you don't have to be artistic necessarily. That's just a channel by which you bear the image, but we're all called to bear it in some other way. And parenthood is one of the ways in which we literally represent God to our small children. And so, we're all image bearers, again, for good or bad, well or poorly. So it's an interesting, like you find image bearing literally everywhere you look.
Yeah, it's good. And it's the image bearing is like, I think one of those things, the thing perhaps that we share in common, right? Every member of humanity, right, shares
Yep.
that trait in common. We were talking about this earlier, but the movie Parasite, right? It came out last year. It was a Academy Award winner, And in this, it's a story of right, these two classes of people, and you have the lower class, who are struggling financially. They find this family that they can take advantage of and kind of mooch off of them, and yet in between these two classes of people, right, you see that they actually share a lot in
Mhm.
common. And I think of all of these characteristics, all these traits, these things that we're talking about, like what make up the image of God. At the end of the day, there's a value statement.
Yeah.
Right, Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6, when Jesus is talking, he's talking about, hey, don't worry, right? But he says, hey, even consider the birds, right? They have the food that they need. They don't store anything. They don't, save for the next day. That your Father in heaven, He feeds them, and are you not much more valuable than they are? And so I think that's how I often hear the image of God, as a framework used the most, is a way. It's a value statement for how we see other people. And we see Jesus in the series, like he recognizes that, right? I have to remind myself to observe and to see the image of God in every person. And Jesus, that's something he just naturally does. And so kind of in these encounters we've been looking at in our teaching series, Jesus, he meets them where they're at. He gives them what they need, whether it's a moment of truth, whether it's an intellectual conversation, whether it's just his gracious approach, his winsome posture. And as we said earlier, Paul, he in Colossians 1 describes Jesus as the visible image of the invisible God. And so I kind of want to move into that part of our discussion as we kind of talk, like, it's hard because nobody else images God perfectly, other than Christ. But we do see, I think, in culture, we see images, different people who do that particularly well. And one of the people that comes to mind is Mr. Rogers, right? There's been movies, there's been documentaries, there's been just different videos on YouTube that have been circulating. And so, yeah, Mr. Rogers, he does such a good job of, I think, whether it's embodying the posture of Christ, whether he just does a good job of recognizing, God's image in each person.
Yeah, I think he's a, a good example because Jesus seems so other. Sometimes I know Jesus was fully man, um, but having Mr. Rogers, having watched his show, I just watched the Tom Hanks movie
Yeah.
um, just last night, and I've read the book that movie's based on, and I just remember reading it and crying pretty often through it because I was just like, this guy's like nobody else. Like there's examples of kind of the outcast in the church that he would just go and love, and he would look straight past whatever the thing is that everyone else judged them about, and he'd just see that. And I think he saw people as children of God, as image bearers. And a part that stuck out to me in the movie is the reporter who's doing the story on him asked his wife, like, what was it like to be married to a saint? And she's like, well, I don't like that word because that basically implies that he's perfect, and he's not. He works very hard. He has routines, he has habits that he does to try and be who he is. He has anger, but how he responds to his anger is different because of the work that he does. And I thought that was a really cool moment
Hmm.
to see, like, yeah, it's a journey for him just like it is any one of us, right?
Yeah, I think too. I mean, it's a remarkable how big of a, he sort of burst back on the scene of our culture a couple of years ago with the documentary and with that feature film, because he doesn't seem like somebody who would that would that would happen for
Mm-hmm.
he's no Kardashian, uh,
No, he's
after
not.
all. Uh, but it's, what is the appeal? And I think part of the appeal is his unique image bearing, because there's nothing like he doesn't have some great skill or some great artistic sensibility. That isn't it at all. It's how well he bears the image. And partly he bears the image well in ways in which maybe we don't. Like, for instance, he treats everyone the same.
Mm-hmm.
And we say we should treat everyone the same, but we don't. And we see him actually treating everyone the same. That's like, oh, that's not only different, but it's appealing. There's something that's very attractive with someone who bears the image well, not for their own sake or for their own anything. That's, if you think about, the whole cultural resurgence of Mr. Rogers, that the movie and the documentary and the book and all of that all sort of happened in a few years, long after he stopped,
Mm-hmm.
making a show. That's, why is that? Why does that fascinate us? And partly because it's rare,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You still see it very often.
No. And
But
I think,
it's rare and attractive. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, that's not only rare, it's cool.
yeah. And I was going to say a lot of the places that I see Mr. Rogers show up are on social media where let's just say the goodness of humanity is not always on
Right.
display.
Right.
There is something about him and his posture, his presence. We were talking about this earlier, but there was a video that was circulating. It's gotten, I think, millions of views on YouTube. It's Fred Rogers before Congress. This is back in the, I don't know, the 60s. He's trying to
Mhm.
secure some public funding for children's programming, and he's got this big shot congressman who's kind of doing the interview, asking, well, hey, why are you here for money? Kind of almost like it's a waste of his
Yeah.
time, and like his posture and everything, even towards him, are just like very closed off, and I'm going to show how much of a big shot I am, how little you are. And in this, Fred Rogers, he speaks very slowly, he's very present, he engages this congressman almost on the same level that he would engage a child if he were explaining something or demonstrating something. He doesn't assume that this guy knows everything. He doesn't assume, like, there's just such a peace and an ease about him as a
Mm-hmm.
person. And at the end of it, the guy's like, yep, you can have your $20 million, which is a lot of
Yeah.
money. And he did that in like
Mm-hmm.
6 minutes. And so there's just something about his presence, his being in the moment. I think he seems very secure in who he is, and his
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah. I think what stood out to me is presence. Like he's so different. You almost want him to speak faster.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can be present with him, it's a pretty wonderful experience. And I think like the guy was making fun of him, almost, the congressman, in this
Yeah.
video
Mm-hmm.
early on, and he's
Mm-hmm.
unfazed by it.
Yeah.
He's there for a reason. He's confident. He believes in what he's doing. He's maybe not got the most polished product in the world, but he's doing it with a lot of heart
Mm-hmm.
and sincerity. And about halfway through, he's like, Can I share the lyrics of a song I wrote?" And he shares the song about anger.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, I'm just like, I can't believe he's doing this. Like, he's in front of all these politicians, and I'm like, and the guy's like, well, I just got chills. Like, I haven't
Yeah.
had anything like
Mm-hmm.
that happen in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So just
Yeah.
like, it's almost mind boggling that in that
Yeah.
moment, he thinks,
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Well, I wonder too. I mean, there's a couple other aspects of bearing or having the image of God and how that shows up uh, around us, or even in the culture. There's two things. I think it's two things. There's one. There's sort of a recurring. You see a lot of stories where people seem lost, uh, and like they don't know who they are. They're trying to find who they are. And in a certain sense, I think a lot of that is trying to discover or remember that they're image bearers, and that's what they're about. Because you see a lot of movies or stories about somebody who's very successful or famous or whatever, and yet they're lost, they're unhappy. They
Mm-hmm.
thought this would do it, and really, because they're an image bearer, that won't do it.
Mm.
And so they're searching for what it means to bear the image well, even though that's not named, or that's not even part of what's in the mind of the storyteller or the filmmaker. That's a theme that's throughout that I think a lot of us can relate to, because we forget. Like, we forget sometimes.
Well,
what
it's
it
because we're
is.
so busy trying to bear someone else's image, right?
Yeah,
And yet
right.
God has
To
already.
do, to right, to compliment, to live up to, whatever. Right? Yeah, exactly. That we forget. It reminds me of, to C.S. Lewis, one of the Chronicles of Narnia, the Silver Chair, where there's this prince who's taken captive and put under a spell, and there's like 1 hour a day, I think, he remembers who he is,
Hmm.
and he tries to get someone to release him, and the rest of the time he doesn't remember who he was. Um, yeah, so I think that's what Lewis is getting at there. We don't always remember who we are, and that sort of then relates back to this, the other, like this being in the image of God is being spiritual as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of anything that denies spirituality, mars the image, and uh, anything that explores spirituality is at least some expression of some reality. I was talking to actually Chad earlier, um, about like horror movies and these sort of demonic movies. Like there seems to be a fascination with them
Mm-hmm.
in our culture. Like, what is that about? I mean, for people who ostensibly don't believe in the spiritual world, we have a lot of fascinations with demonic movies, because I think that's partly, there's a sense that draws us to that because we're spiritual, um, and so it's a sort of a mirror image or a dark version of spirituality. But I think it interests us because it's like, if we were just robots, I don't think we would care about that sort of thing, right? So even good and evil spirituality is interacting with that. We're interacting on a level that, because we're image bearers, that
Mm-hmm.
another part of creation couldn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what that. It's not a fully formed thought, but I think there's a lot of those sorts of movies, which I don't love, partly because I feel like they're maybe a little too close to reality in some
Mm.
cases. Uh, but it fascinates me that we're fascinated with them. That we're fascinated with Mr. Rogers,
Mm-hmm.
and we're also fascinated with The Conjuring, or whatever.
Is that your favorite one?
I didn't watch it. I assume anything with The Conjuring, any Conjuring is a movie I don't want to watch if
Yeah,
they're
hard
conjuring
pass.
something. Hard pass
Yeah.
on The Conjuring. And I'm not. There's no judgment for people who like those sorts of
Yeah.
movies. I'm just not
Sure.
into that genre as much. But part of it is sort of like, I kind of believe, I'm not sitting back thinking, oh, none of that's real, so this is entertaining, which I think some people probably think, but that doesn't explain the draw to that mode of entertainment.
Mm.
I think, this is I'm not saying this is real, like actual like this, but something like this is real. So I'm not sure I want to,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, ponder that real close.
Yeah, and I'd like to
Yeah.
sleep at night.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. There's that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
No, that's good. Well, hey, just in the sake of time, I want to kind of start to wrap up, but I do think that um, as image bearers, right, we have certain callings. As people who even profess the name of Jesus, we bear His image too. And so I wanted to share a few things. J.R.R., a professor at Covenant, he wrote a book called The Echoes of Eden, and at the end of his first chapter, he describes a few of the different callings for us as we engage work of creating, as we engage essentially work of bearing the image of God. And the first, to seek to glorify God in all that we do. Secondly, we're designed to find fulfillment for ourselves and developing, expressing the gifts that God has richly given us. We're to seek to be a benefit to others. In being creative, we fulfill our human design by exercising dominion over the earth. And then in all of our creative work, we are to work to set back the boundaries of the fall, because we are in a world where our ability to bear God's image and others' ability to bear God's image is marred. It is distorted, and yet the perfect image of God, Christ, is at work to redeem and to restore all things, and we will continue to bear God's image in the new earth and the new heavens. And so That's good. And then just kind of maybe want to end with what Mr. Rogers, kind of how he ends his shows, right? You've made this day a special day by just your being you. There's no person in the whole world like you, and I like you just the way you are. There's something, I think, there that's good. And maybe in this season of COVID and election cycles and social media, that's a good reminder for us all. So thank you for joining us for episode 2. Mike, Kyle, thank you guys for this discussion. Looking forward to next month and just continuing to talk about culture and film and art and how that intersects with this whole faith story thing that we're trying to live out.